Right, I'm Mike Thornton. Most of you will know me. As it says up there, I'm a director of Broadband Training Limited, so I'm part of that company, and I'm also the chair of the training committee within the SCTE exec. And a couple of points about the apparent dual role I perform here. As far as our course material is concerned, both the brochures that Chris has shown you and any other documents that we produce as training material, the actual editorial control sits within the SCTE executive. That means that the content of the courses really is the SCTE's executive right to sign off and agree as being appropriate. And that ties back into this point about accreditation. So the course is an SCTE course, it's not a Broadband Training Limited course. Broadband Training Limited is the vehicle we use to help create, manage and organise all the commercial aspects of producing courses, but the editorial control and the authentication remains firmly within the SCTE, our body. Now, the course that Chris alluded to was a trigger from several points. We've had discussions within Virgin Media and elsewhere, and originally was triggered off by a discussion at the Anger Cable Exhibition the year before this, when someone approached and said, it's all very well you have these fine, highfalutin technical courses that you have, but we really have the need for an introductory course for staff who are coming into our companies, who are non-technical, and who are finding the engineers are bamboozling them all with multiple acronyms and references to obscure bits of technology, which they're really using perhaps more to show off than necessarily to do anything else. And we listened politely to the gent who turned up and said, this is fascinating stuff, and we thought, it's okay, well, you know, have you got any real numbers here? Because creating a course is a fairly labour-intensive task. And it became apparent the more we explored this option, particularly once we got walking around inside Virgin Media with this, that actually there were potential for hundreds of people who would want to attend such a course, both as indoctrination, introductory courses when people join a company, but equally within an existing company, and we can pick Virgin, but I can think of others, UPC for example, where there are plenty of staff within the company who feel that they are being left out of the technical arena, even though they have to interface with it. So you can think of customer service representatives, people in the accounts department, lots of people, even the COO perhaps. So we thought, okay, well there's some mileage in this, so we'll get on and we'll see if we can produce a course which will address this. But rather than being in the form of the formal study course with effectively a large textbook to work from, which you could do either in a communal study or even from homework, this would be a course which is slightly different in its delivery. So this would be a course which would take a half day. It would be delivered to an audience, just as I'm doing now, and would take the format of going through the subject in a sufficiently deep manner to impart enough understanding, but not to take anybody down into the vile depths of Ohm's law, or anywhere else like that, for that matter. And at the end of it all, there would be a handbook, if you will. Really, it's an aide-memoire in the form of a short booklet that would be given out to the people, which was a rerun of everything they'd seen during the half day in the morning or perhaps or the afternoon, with a I've attended certificate to go with it. So it's not in the sense of formal technical qualification at all. And so for that reason, during our discussions, for one reason or another, I volunteered that I'd actually run through a bit of it just to see how this particular audience takes to it. Even though, of course, gentlemen and ladies, do we have any ladies present today? You're all far too technically competent to need any of this knowledge that I'm about to attempt to impart to you. In fact, what I'm actually going to do, as you see from the slide up there, I'm just going to go and look at the introduction section. I'm not going to give you the full half-day course, you'll be pleased to know. I'm going to take about 5 or 10 minutes of your time and run through it and see whether I can elicit some reaction from you for the slides that I'm going to run through. So, it starts out talking about communication. Communication takes lots of forms. Janet and John's slides, I know, but I like them. Communication really forms down into two particular points. Point to point. You and your mate having a beer in the pub. Information flow is largely symmetric, backwards and forwards. Chit-chat, chit-chat. This, of course, it's my mother-in-law, in which case you can't get a word in edgeways. But mostly it's supposed to be point to point. Alternatively, it's what I'm doing now. It's point to multipoint. Most of the information comes out from some central location and is broadcast, if you like, out to the audience around it. Features of communications, however, there's always a need to discuss privacy so that people will understand that you're not sharing this information with everybody else. You just want to talk to each other. So that's a feature of communications. Now, at the moment, this is not a private conversation. And in fact, in some communal conversations, such as around the dinner table, everyone's happy to talk across each other and listen partially to each other's conversations, so there is no need for privacy. But there are occasions where privacy is a real issue. That applies to all forms of communication. As communication goes along, and you stand further and further and further away, and people get further and further apart, at some point, communications fails. You just can't hear what the other person is saying. And thus you need to invent something to deal with communications. And here we get a bit of Greek to feed into the waiting audience. There's a bit of culture here. You need telecommunications, from the Greek word tele, meaning at a distance. Telecommunications. So it's easy to see how you get to telephone, sound at a distance, television, vision at a distance, and so forth. Need to keep up with my bits of paper. There we go. So, going back into time, telecommunications of one form or other has been handled out for a very, very long time, thousands of years. You write a letter. That's a form of two-way communications. You write something down, you send it off using perhaps the good old Pony Express or the equivalent thereof. To the far end, someone reads it, writes a letter back to you, and back it comes. Just as good as a conversation, except, of course, it's not real time. So you have these long delays in what goes on. It's fine. Letter writing, a dying art perhaps today, but there's still those who are particularly good at it. It's all very well, but it's not much good if you really want something which is near real time. So various systems developed where they looked at what you could do with phrases, and that's where the system of flags, which the navies of the world used until relatively recently came to line. You turn a phrase into a flag sequence. One of the best well-known ones is, of course, England expects. And if anybody can remember the rest of the sentence, please enlighten me. I know the words duty come to somewhere. That sometimes doesn't do either. And schemes were invented whereby you could actually develop a means of sending the alphabet visually, and semaphore was such a thing. You can see the flags. Anyone seen the Heathcliff stuff? It's all there. It lasted a surprisingly long length of time, well into the 20th century. Even though other forms of communications had overtaken it, they produced so simple and so steady results that they remained alive for a very, very long time. Things really began to change in telecommunications with the invention of the battery. Good old Alexandro Volta in 1800, a long time ago now, over 200 years, invented the battery. The battery produced the ability to produce steady flows of electric current. And it was not long before all sorts of people began to play around with this to see what they could do with it. In fact, the battery remained the primary source of power for most of that century. It wasn't until about 1870 that the dynamo appeared. So 17 years of batteries only. Makes you think a bit. So one of the first things that came along was people discovered that, of course, you can send an electric current along a wire a long way, much further than you can shout. Much, much further. And if you wind it round a piece of iron, you turn it into a magnet, and you can make it attract another piece of iron, and you can create something which, if you turn the current off and on, produces a switching effect, and you can make a noise or a clatter at the far end. So sometime in the 1840s, good old Mr. Samuel Morse, and the rest of his confederates, and various other people too, Wheatstone amongst others, invented what became the electric telegraph. This is a really simple form of communication. You have a battery, a switch, you run a piece of wire from the switch across a set of poles up in the air. No clever insulating materials around then. You get to the far end where you have some sounding device, and that sounding device sends the current back to the battery. You have a nice circuit, a loop, word that pops up again from time to time. The local loop? Well, this is an extended loop, but there we go. Now, I have yet to rehearse this bit, so I don't know whether this is going to work at all. First of all, do I have a mouse? Gentlemen, anybody know if I have a mouse that works on the screen? I do? Okay, fair enough. Well, there's a mouse here. Does it move around? It does. And do we have any audio? He's going to turn it on. There we go. Bit of Morse coming out the far end. This is 12 words a minute, and I can't remember it anymore. Anybody else do Morse here? Roger, I'm looking at you. No? No? Well, I'm thinking I'm going to offer a prize in this course while I do it, if anybody can actually decode it. I've got about 4 or 5 letters into it from my rubbishy old 12 words a minute of 50 years ago, and all I know is it isn't a word. oh, a minute. This is current off on, off on, off on, off on. This is digital, chaps. This is 1840. There's nothing new in the world at all, really. Digital's been around forever. Most people think it's a modern idea. Okay, that's fine. Now, this is all very well for doing things like that, but in fact, Morse goes at a surprising speed. The world record for Morse is over 70 words a minute. I can't, even me, speak 70 words a minute. You really have got to write some to go that speed. However, let's have a look at a phone signal. Rather more easy to compensate here. Here we have a guy. He's going boom into the phone. Now that gives a pressure wave in air which comes out, which is, as you see on my little graphic up there, consists of a rapid pulse with a long tail. And we feed it into a device. Now this device is a device which converts energy from one form into another. Another fancy word is a transducer. Now a transducer is a generic term for devices which convert energy from one form to another. In this case it's a microphone. So we now have an electrical signal. Well, an electrical signal mirrors the signal it came from as a sound wave. It is an analogue of it. A smooth, continuous representation. Travels down a wire, gets to the other end, and goes into another transducer. In this case, it's a speaker, and out the other end. That's the phone. Been around for a long, long time, and analogue services of that sort on the phone have existed for a very, very long time indeed. That's fairly easy to grasp. Okay, you make an electrical current flow, it's a representation of what you started out with in the first place. It goes down a wire, comes out the other end. Not too difficult principle to grasp. What do you do about pictures, though? Vision, that's the other most important thing for us as humans to use in our interaction with each other. How do you take a picture? There's a picture hanging in a frame. Well, the trick, of course, is not to try and look at it in two dimensions. Look at it as a series of one-dimensional bits of information. So you take your picture. In my particular case here, I've crudely sliced it up into 30 bits, 30 slices, 30 lines of picture within this frame. And you take those bits of information as their lines, and then you feed those through a transducer, which can sense, I need to stretch your imagination a bit here, but it can sense dark and light. Let's go into the complexities of what we do with colour. Just dark and light is enough. And then you send it a bit at a time. Off it goes, down the wire, until eventually it's all gone. Then it arrives at the other end. And when it arrives at the other end, in it comes, and eventually the entire picture arrives. There we go. It's not much different from sending a sound wave down, of course. And you can send a picture just like that. Must be enough people in the room who remember fax machines. Yes, there are. See the grins. It's just the same thing. Now, of course, you can play tricks here. If you send that picture fast enough, the human eye doesn't see the build-up and the tear-down of the picture. It just sees it go. And if you send it repetitively fast enough, and it's actually an image of a moving image, then the brain does the reassembly bit and creates the illusion of motion. You have to send each frame something between 20 and 30 times a second to create that illusion. Now that creates the thought here, which leads into the concept perhaps of bandwidth. In the case of the sound wave, yes, the human ear, this thing here, can hear sounds that vibrate at a particular rate. Now, for example, me being an amateur and not a very good guitarist, I know that the top E string vibrates on my guitar at 330 times a second. 330 hertz, named after good old Heinrich Hertz himself. And the human ear, well, the young human ear at least, can hear sounds which go up to about 12,000 hertz, which is a pretty high whistle. I don't think I can probably hear that anymore, but there will be those who can. And this gives you the notion that the human's voice has a bandwidth, if you like, which is about 12,000 hertz wide. And that's fine. That means you can hear anything from the lowest bass to the highest squeal. If you're going to send your pictures down this line, and they're going to go much, much faster than that, you need more of this bandwidth stuff to create this illusion that you're going to create of the moving image at the far end. So basically, bandwidth is a notion of how much data you're trying to squeeze into an element of time. In the case of, I've got some numbers down here so I can remember them all. A TV picture, for example, having started with sound, which has bandwidth which is in thousands, kilo, thousands of hertz, in TV pictures are actually based in 1,000 times greater than that. They're based in megahertz, lots and lots of them. So when people talk about megahertz, they're talking about quite high chunks of data, or quite high chunks of bandwidth. So we've sent it off. It's got to the other end. It's arrived. We found that digital isn't new at all. It's been around for over 150 years. Analog, which is disappearing at the moment, is actually how these things and this thing works. So whatever you do with your fancy digital systems, you're always going to have to live in an analog world. End of the first bit, and end of my spiel for now. Questions? You're over to you, Mark.
Have you paid copyright to the Greeks for this?
I know you're short of money, Costas, but John, sorry.
Any more questions?
Dumbfounded.
Could you simplify it, Mike, for me?
No.
So regarding the courses in general that you do, and you have online exams, are you looking at making the course online interactive?
Not at present, Alistair, no. This particular course is a one-off because it's entirely lecture-delivered courses. Some of the other courses are done that way in part by some training entities. As Chris explained, our task really is not to set up a large training company, it's to sell a lot of training courses with the SCTE banner attached to them. Of course, that's what we want to do. The notion of an interactive session while people are going through the training has yet to cross our path. Not that it shouldn't, and I'm sure with sufficient input from wherever the audience we see is, that we take it into consideration. It's a matter of resource juggling, really, but not at the present, no.
Is the main premise of this to make money for the SCTE or spread knowledge around?
Spread knowledge, first and always.
So will you charge a notion amount for the handbooks and allow people just to have them, or do they have to go through the accreditation and the course?
Roger, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah,
You've got the clearest answer to that.
it's interesting. One of the things we do at our strategy meeting every year is to look at our spends on various activities. And over the years, and going back to 1992, we have probably broken even on training. Some years, like last year, year before, quite a considerable income based on the last round of courses. This year, up till now, a lot less income and a lot of cost because we've been revamping the courses. So we've got this sawtooth goes up and down, but in the end we just about break even, and from the society's point of view, that's what it's about. You know, as you all know, we're not cash strapped. Our job is really to funnel funds back into the industry in some way that benefits people in most ways. So that's the aim. Going back to the question,
Just UK or wider, in places like India where I know you have a big push for training, is that more of a commercial entity?
no, it's not. I would hate to insult anybody by saying that the Indian, to deal with Indians is an interesting process, and in the end you get a price which is sustainable but not profit making. But the deal there, and the deal with most of what we've been doing, is actually a very simple franchise model. We are quite happy to sell the courses a little above cost to recoup some of the capital outlay. But you've probably all seen the course, they're around about sort of £90 each. For that £90, essentially you get no training, but you get the manuals, you get an exam, and you get certification, all included in that cost. Now, it is possible with most of the courses to do home study. You can take the manuals, read through them. Arguably, the installer one needs a little bit more hands-on, and therefore, in the future, might be a little bit more interactive. But the others are textbook learning in a hopefully a more friendly than a simple textbook, but nonetheless, it's accumulation of knowledge, and you could read the network architecture book and take the exam from that without any instruction whatsoever. So it's flexible. Equally, and India is a good case in point, if somebody wants to take the basic courses and discount for quantity, and in their case they actually did the printing as well rather than ship them across, then we'll negotiate a price which is really just IPR and certification. They do the training. We don't even know how much they charge for the training. It's irrelevant to us. Essentially, we're providing a facility, a very simple franchise. Anybody who wants to do training, and if they're a corporate member, can actually buy as many courses they like and set up as a trainer. We're quite happy for that to happen. Broadband Training Limited is really all about the SMEs who only want maybe half a dozen people trained, in which case we can provide the resource, or else they want their trainers trained, in which case, again, we can do that. But as I said, separating out that commercial activity from preparing the syllabus, preparing the documents, and looking after the exam and certification, that's SCTE. Everything else, in a way, Broadband Training Limited is just another franchisee. So that's the sort of model we're working on.
Just extend one more point out from the bit I've just been through. This course, as it's a lecture delivered course, at the moment we've been looking around for beta test sites to actually run the course as a full proper course, not just as a bit of a play around. And we have our first probable delivery for this course in Dublin in a few weeks' time to the first audience there for UPC. We have several dates up in the air for Virgin, which I think a lot of people understand why perhaps having difficulty in pinning down at the moment. But it appears to be going in the right direction. We expect, having done so, we will then take the feedback, the final feedback that comes in terms of how suitable it is. It appears to be okay on the surface, but I feel in this particular case we'd like to get just one more feedback round, and then the thing will be set as capable of being disseminated to any and whatever audience wants to take it.
Also not mentioned, because they're one of them actually is in publication form, and that's a fibre optics course. Again, you can imagine that doing an interactive one on computer is not perhaps the best idea for a fibre optic course. You really do need a bit of hands-on, and therefore some of the courses do need to be taught, there's no doubt about that. But the fibre optic one is quite comprehensive. That's available in a textbook type form, and we're also looking at some basic introductory courses, not for dummies, but for people who are actually coming into the industry for the first time, but in a technical role, and therefore want a good explanation in a little bit more depth about both what broadband is about and what networks are about. So that's also in preparation as well, and hopefully we'll have those within a few months. So in 1 year, I think we've come quite a long way. We're hopeful, obviously, that the Indian thing will expand. And again, we're not limiting to our first franchisee there. It's essentially open, and we're hoping that SCTE India itself will actually take the ball and encourage other people to actually do training for us over there. Maybe SCTE India will do training for us over there. All those options are open.
I'm done. Any other questions? Right. I'm going to escape while I can, Mark.
Thank you very
case,
much. Thanks to Chris and Mike.